the English Resultative Construction, sorry. This is part of my PhD project from CONICET, the National and Scientific Council in Argentina. And particularly in this talk, I'm going to speak about what we have found about how native speakers of Spanish comprehend the English resultative constructions, and particularly the differences between two types of resultatives, ones that codify change of locations and the ones that codify change of states. So to begin with, we consider resultatives to be a key instance of the English style in the event representations of the events that differs considerably from the Spanish style in the event constructions. This is why we wonder to what extent resultatives are comprehended and acquired by Spanish native speakers, and how we, I am in Spanish native speakers, of course, we access the English event representation of events, right? So for this, first I'm going to mention what are the different, what are the resultative constructions to us, the subtypes that we are considering here, what makes them different from the Spanish constructions of events, and the depictive constructions, which is a structure that is present in both languages. And I'm going to state the objectives of this talk, and I'm going to describe the experimental design, which is a sentence comprehension task, and the results that we got from it. So first, as we might know, Spanish and English contrast in the way that the events are codified, but they are very different. English is an instance following Tell Me of a satellite framed language in which the main verb tends to codified manner. For instance, Mary danced John Tyre, this is an example of a resultative sentence. So the verb codifies manner, and if results needs to be codified, we in English needs the resultatives to include a particle that codifies result, right? And in Spanish, the constructions of event is quite the opposite, because it is a verb-frame language, so the result is codified in the main verb, like in María cansó a Juan bailando, which is the Spanish translation for Mary danced John Tyre. And here the manner, if it is required, is lexicalized in an agent, in bailando, right? So we see that they are quite the opposite. And this is very interesting to us. And this is why we are going to study resultatives in the first place. So what are the resultative constructions to us? First of all, we consider that they form a family of constructions and that they behave as a complex verb. We have a main verb that codifies manner and a particle, and either an adjectival phrase or a prepositional phrase, that both of them work as a complex verb, right? And they follow the direct object restriction. Levin and Rappaport proposed these restrictions, and this states that the result of the resultatives is predicated from the direct object instead of the subject. And this allows for resultatives with intransitive verbs to include an argument that is not lexically licensed by the verb, but it is required for the structure, which is very interesting. But this does not happen to all of the resultatives. For instance, path resultatives, which is the first one that I'm going to explain, corresponds to the structures in which the main verb denotes the manner of motion, role, and the result and the results in a change of location referred to by the prepositional phrase up the hill. And the consensus is that the satellite introduces this up the hill introduces a delimited path traversed by the theme, the goal, right? The manner of motion here and the prepositional phrase are related in a highly predictable way, in a highly predictable causal change, which makes this type of resultatives a little bit different from the other ones. And the fact that we can translate this to Spanish, but we will still need to include a result verb instead of a manner verb in Spanish. For instance, in Bill subió la pelota por la colina rodando, which is the Spanish translation for Bill rolled the ball up the hill. So what I'm saying that we can translate this sentence, but still the verb would be like, we'll need a Spanish construction of a Spanish logic to construct this path resultative. However, Spanish presents this, we can codify path resultatives with manner verbs in Spanish. For instance, if we want to translate Bill walked to school, in Spanish we can say Bill caminó hasta la escuela. We can use a manner verb to express the change of location in a resultative construction. But there is a difference. The difference is that in Spanish we cannot cross the boundary that is stated by the prepositional phrase, whereas in English, this crossing, the boundary crossing is allowed. So there are some types of resultatives, path resultative in Spanish, but they are not quite the same. That's the point. That's what I want to state very clear. The other type of resultatives that we're considering here are the property, in which we have a main verb that codifies manner and an adjectival phrase that codifies result in a change of state. Here, one of the arguments, more particularly the direct object change of state within this resultative construction. And the final state is the result of the activity, right? Being tired, John being tired, is the result of the first event, Mary danced John. And both situations are causally related in a relationship that is not predictable, as path resultatives, for instance. And in addition, what is interesting here is that, again, we have an intransitive verb, which that cannot take by itself the direct object. We cannot say Mary danced John, but we need the whole resultative constructions to make meaning out of it, to make sense out of it. So these direct object restrictions allow the introduction of this unlicensed direct object. And this is similar to what happens with fake reflexives, the last type of resultatives that I'm going to present here, in which the reflexive pronoun here, the baby cried himself asleep, does not saturate the argument of the intransitive verb cried, for instance, so that they cannot, again, constitute a construction by itself. We cannot say the baby cried himself. We need the whole construction, that the baby cried himself asleep. And the necessary presence of this reflexive is explained again by the direct object restriction. But there is nothing similar to this in Spanish. And again, this, as we have adjectival phrase, this codifies a change of state type of resultative. So this is more or less the three types of resultatives that we are considering, like the three big subfamilies of resultatives. However, in Spanish, there is a type of double predicate constructions that is syntactically similar to property resultatives, in the sense that we have a main verb and an adjectival phrase that codifies, but does not codify result. That is the difference. The difference is in terms of semantics. Instead, this codifies the state of affairs of one of the arguments in the sentence. We can say in Spanish, él devolvió el libro dañado, and in English, it can be literally translated to he returned the book damaged. So we will need these structures as control structure, let's say, to understand how Spanish native speakers comprehend depictives and resultatives in English, right? So what we decided to do here is, well, we were wondering to what extent the different resultatives are learned by Spanish native speakers who learn English at different proficiency levels. And we wonder if the different subtypes of resultatives are learned in a given sequence. And if this sequence occurs, we wanted to identify if it is modulated by two main things. First, the departure from the Spanish pattern, each structure's departure from the Spanish pattern, and the proficiency level of subjects. So we think that the proficiency would play a role here, but this effect would interact with the type of resultatives, and the constructions that are closer to Spanish, like depictives, would be easier to comprehend than the ones that don't have a parallel structure in Spanish. Very intuitive in this sense. So for this, we designed a sentence comprehension task that I'm going to explain in a minute. And this was made up in an online questionnaire which was distributed among English students at the University of National University of Cuyo in Argentina, here in Mendoza, where I live. And we reached 287 participants. And this questionnaire included the task and English proficiency, 2 measures of English proficiency, and the frequency of use and immersion questionnaire. Oh, sorry, somebody needed to say something? Okay. So this language history test, I'm not going to refer to the results of this test, because first we didn't find anything very significant to interpret the results. But I'm going to focus here with proficiency. We tested proficiency with 2 measures, by means of 2 measures, a self-reported questionnaire, which included questions about international exams the students might have passed, or different courses they passed, etc., and a vocabulary Lexile test, which is a standardized test for the identification of words and non-words in English. Due to time constraints, I'm just going to focus on the first one, the first reported proficiency questionnaire. However, the results that we obtained regarding the vocabulary Lexile scores were very in line with the self-reported proficiency, so we are okay with that. And the sample was divided in 3 proficiency groups: low, intermediate, and high. The test consisted on the subjects had to read a sentence, for instance, Tom watered the plants flat, and they had to choose the option that better described the meaning. So there were 24 target sentences, included property, path, and fake reflexives and depictives, and the destructors, and 12 destructors, with 3 possible interpretations. This was generally the idea. We wanted to include more items for each condition, but the thing is, this was too long, too difficult for subjects to actually finish the task, so we needed to make it shorter. And results here, we use a mixed effect logistic regression model to test whether response accuracy in the comprehension task changed depending on construction type and proficiency level, and their interaction, which turned out very significant. And here we have the graph, the plot of accuracy improvement as predicated by the model. Group 1 corresponds to low proficient subjects, Group 2 to intermediate, and Group 3 to advanced. And we can see that here's the accuracy of response and the different constructions, right? Depictive, path, property, and fake reflexives. We see that the model predicts very different performance in each groups, and this is different also for the different conditions. And our results are more or less in line with what we predict. What we can see here is that low proficient L2 speakers were the only group to have more correct responses for depictives, the first bar, when contrasted to property and fake reflexives. So this difference is not that clear for intermediate and high. So this difference is not that clear for these 2 proficiency groups. And the depicted constructions did not differ from path at any proficiency level. So these 2 bars, although on the low proficient subject seems very different, this statistically was not significant at all.
5 minutes left, Alejandra.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And the comparisons within each level of construction site show that the correct responses for path, property, and fake reflexives actually increased significantly across the three levels, right? More or less what the model predicted. In general, what we can say about this, I'm sorry, this is very short, but I don't want to skip the questions and suggestions. So we can say here so far that proficiency seems to modulate the comprehension of the different types of resultatives, And there seems to be a comprehension gradient, which is not exactly what we expected, but there seems to be something. Depictives are processed more or less the same or similarly to path resultative constructions, and they seem to be easier for Spanish subjects than property and fake reflexive. We expected, in terms of linguistic distance, like a more clear gradient of the structures. First depictive, then path, then property, and then fake reflexive. But so far with these results, we cannot state this. As proficiency improved, there was an increase in incorrect responses for path, property, and fake reflexive, but this increase was not so striking for depictives. As we saw, depictives were very high at all proficiency levels. So this might indicate the crucial effect of L1 and L2. As speakers can resort to their Spanish depictive constructions, there is no linguistic distance they need to overcome. And the fact that subjects' response to path were similar to depictives might indicate that first, these resultatives would change of location secondary predicates seems to be easier, seems to be closer to Spanish too. So they seem to be easier to comprehend than resultatives with change of states as secondary predicate. So resultatives closer to Spanish, as I was saying, like Bill rolled the ball up the hill, Bill ran into the room, he walked to school, for instance. Path resultatives are better understood than the ones that seems to be more distant from Spanish, like property resultatives. He wiped the table clean, he drank the bath dry, he hammered the metal flat, for instance. And fake reflexives, or he caught himself unconscious. This seems to be very, very difficult for Spanish native speakers. And this difference in resultative comprehension and the correlation with proficiency and distance seems to be in line with the idea that learning L2 is a way of learning to think in another language, in the sense that the closer the structures are to our language, our native language, the easier it is for us to comprehend, and the more time that we spend practicing it and rehearsing to think in another language, the better we understand its intrinsic logic and the way we perceive events and codify the linguistic events in L2. So this is more or less what I wanted to share with you. Here I'm eager to listen to you, to see your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alejandra.
I'm going to stop sharing, right?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Will be okay? Mm-hmm.
Yes. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. So the session, the question session is open. Does anyone would like to ask? I think, let me check the chat. Yes, I think so far we don't have any question, please. You can use that.
I think there is a raising hand. Somebody raised his hand, but I don't know who.
Yeah. I can't see a hand. Maybe it was an applause. Janine would like to ask a question.
Just a very small clarification question. Very interesting project. Just to measure linguistic distance, what did you do? I didn't actually pick that up. I'm quite interested in that issue for another project I'm doing. How did you operationalize that?
Actually, I had to rush about it here, but in our project, we were working with two hypotheses: linguistic distance and linguistic complexity, which we consider to be very in line, very close together. And we made a very detailed linguistic analysis, which applies more, actually more to complexity of the structures. If you want, I can show you a little table that we designed. Mm-hmm. It is actually here. I need to share screen again. Here, this is it. I had it ready. Okay. Here we have some syntactic features that are present for each of the structures. We were working. Well, we identified first. We were talking about a complex predicate, which is the case for path, and not for path, but for depictive, property, and fake reflexive, non-lexically licensed direct object, regarding the direct object restrictions, which of them had them, high or low entropy for each of them, how causally related are the two elements, and the exceptional use of a form in terms of if they included the reflexive pronoun or if they didn't. This is a summary of the the analysis that we made for each of these structures. And what we did was to try to how would they be translated to Spanish? How would they work to Spanish? And that is what we understand by linguistic distance. If the structure is actually the same in Spanish, like depicted, so they are mirror. If we have something very, very close to it, like path, so it is close. But as far as the structure gets more complex, it seems to be farther from the Spanish way in which we construct events.
Okay, okay, that's very helpful. Yes, definitely. I was just thinking of the relationship between the lexical items of the different languages, but it's very interesting that you looked at the relevant syntactic structures, right? To what extent they overlap between the languages. So it's very interesting. Thank you. I think there is a question now in the chat.
Yes, there are two more questions, Alejandra. One person says, Gemma say, I guess you don't consider sentences as María le hizo bailar hasta el agotamiento. El bebé lloró hasta que se durmió. That's her comment.
I'm just...
Okay, let me
el
read
bebé
the other
durmió.
one. Yes, hasta,
el bebé lloró.
Hasta que se durmió. Thank you very much for your interesting talk. If we change the preposition in the sentence, Bill caminó hasta la escuela. So I'm reading this as well because it could be related to the previous one, no? Bill caminó hasta la escuela to Bill caminó a la escuela. Do you think there may be a possibility that the boundary was crossed?
Yes, very complex. Thank you very much for these examples. Regarding the first one, el bebé lloró hasta que se durmió, that would be a very Spanish way of codifying resultative construction in English. But again, we have the result in the verb lloró, right? Hasta que se durmió. No, wait, it's the other way around. In English, that would be the baby cried himself asleep, which is, yeah, it makes sense. It's very similar to it. I will need to think about this. What is interesting here is that anyways, although we can translate this more or less to Spanish, Spanish lacks the complexity of their fake reflexive that English needs to introduce there. We don't need that fake reflexive to make that sentence. However, I will need to check it, but it's a great example. Thank you very much. And regarding the next one, Bill caminó hasta la escuela or Bill caminó a la escuela, I think that the contrast can make a difference. When we contrast, when we put these two different prepositional phrases and we contrast them, I figured that maybe Bill caminó hasta la escuela in contrast to Bill caminó a la escuela might mean that actually there was a boundary crossing. Very interesting anyway, because in isolation, I don't know if we can say that. But in the contrast, I think that the different highlights, like, yeah. Well, thank you. I'm going to think about this.
Another question. Your first example, Bill rolled the ball up the hill, has also been defined as cost motion construction. How do you make a difference between cost motion constructions from resultative constructions?
Well, that is actually a problem that we have with path resultatives, because I think that they are very in the middle. I mean, I wouldn't be able now to make to state why are they different, but I understand that past resultatives are very different from property and fake reflexives because they seem to cause motion construction. Like and it's very difficult for us to actually make a corpus out of it and to be able to have like a nice list of path resultatives to be able to compare them to property and fake reflexives, and that is part of the complexity of path resultatives. I wouldn't be able to answer this right now. I will need to think about it. Yeah, but that is one of our concerns about path. Absolutely.
Finally, I want to quickly, we have a couple of minutes, and I want also to comment something, Alejandra. I know that, I wonder if you know a bit more how acceptable some of these resultative constructions are in Latin American varieties around, for example, the Caribbean. I remember that some of these constructions are used more and more in the Spanish as a contact with English. So, do you know something? I know that this is a bit, you know.
You mean that resultatives are being used in Spanish by Latin American subjects, like more
Yes, by Spanish in the Caribbean, for example. So sentences such as el niño se durmió llorando are more common, or we can expect this type of sentences in these varieties of Spanish. I don't know if you have captured this, if you have read this.
Actually, that is very interesting because I haven't thought about it, which actually makes, I don't know, maybe it makes sense in terms of linguistic context, but I haven't thought about it. Actually, I haven't found this example earlier, like the baby, el niño se durmió llorando, for instance, and I have made like a huge list of resultatives in Spanish, and I didn't have this one, for instance. So very interesting, because it seems that there is some productivity even in Spanish that is like working on there. But in the difference for me, the crucial difference is that in English they are very productive, and the resultative constructions are not the same, are not as acceptable for an American native speakers than British native speakers. So they're very productive, but I think that they are also very idiosyncratic. So it wouldn't be weird that in Latin Caribbean Latin Americans starts like producing these types of structures as well. I will think about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very